Hello there and welcome to another BowBeats review. Today we're taking a look at this highly anticipated, highly appreciated follow-up to the Keystep, namely the Keystep Pro. I don't think it's an exaggeration that a lot of people have been wanting a follow-up to the Keystep. It's probably one of the most beloved and iconic MIDI keyboards in its price segment, and I'm super excited to see Arturia come out with the Pro version. So in today's review, we're going to go over what the Keystep Pro is, make some music with it, and I'll give you some pros and cons and alternatives at the end of the video. And this review is sponsored by distrokid.com. So if you want to release your music on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, and other stores, it's a great place. It's affordable. I've been with them for many years. I have actually released a new song called Frankly using DistroKid. So go and check out DistroKid. My link is in the description, and you can also check out my new song if you want to. Now let's get into the Keystep Pro. So let me start with an overview of the setup that I have hooked up here for this video. So here I have 7 out of 8 drum gates going into the Black Noir drum module. I'm also using the 2 MIDI out, so one goes to the XD module and one goes to the MC101 that I'm using as a sound module for this setup here, mainly because I don't have that much space on the table. I've also hooked up CV gate and mod outputs here from one of the CV Eurorack voices, controlling this Dreadbox module here, and using this mod output here, I'm actually controlling the filter here using CV. So the harder I hit a key, the more it affects the filter. So track number 1 is drums, track number 2 is controlling the Minilog XD, track number 3 is controlling the MC101, and track number 4 is controlling the Eurorack voice. So let me start off with my favorite feature. It's not the sequencers. It's definitely not the keybed, but it's actually something which is very rare on a MIDI keyboard. It has a built-in metronome. With a little speaker. Now you might call me crazy for being so happy about this particular feature, but it's actually something that I have been longing for on many other sequencers and MIDI keyboards. And the metronome has its own little level control for the speaker, and you can output it into your mixer as well. So it's a small thing, but I really like that inclusion. So let's start by talking about the sequencer. We have 4 tracks, and all of them can be polyphonic. But it's actually more than 4 tracks, because track number 1 can be a drum track, which means that you have 24 individual drum tracks on track number 1, which can have different lengths. So you can actually do polymeter stuff. Track 2, 3, and 4 can either sequence something or be an arpeggio. So you select it here using these buttons. So it's either or, so I can have an ARP running here instead. Or I can switch it to the sequencer, playing whatever is recorded into the sequencer. The arpeggiators are independent of each other, so you can set all 3 tracks to arpeggiator and use them and do different settings for each of them. Per track there are 16 patterns, and each of the patterns can be 64 steps. You can chain them together if you want to. You can also save scenes, which are like saved states of what's going on currently with all of the sequencers and arpeggios. And each step of the sequencer can hold up to 16 notes, so you can do pretty big chords per step. You can also change the length per note in a chord. We'll look at that a little later. So you can actually do pretty advanced stuff. And if we go to the drum track here, you can see that it lights up. These are the 24 tracks or channels that you can use for drums. So when I hit a key, you can see that we're changing channels or tracks for the drum track. So let's create something. We're holding down pattern. We can select an empty pattern here. Let's go to the kick, place down the steps you want. Now we have this button here called Step Edit. Let's hit it. So now we can select any step, and we can now change gate, velocity, time shift, and randomness values per step. Because this is hooked up to the drum gates, it's actually only the time shift and randomness that are applicable here. So we can time shift something back and forth a little bit, or we could put down these two notes here, going to Step Edit and change the randomness so that they actually don't trigger as frequently. Now let's go to track number 3. Let's add some bass. Hit shift, hit extend here. Let's make it 64 step. And now we can utilize the metronome, and there is a pre-count as well. I'm super hyped about this. Hit record, hit play. There we go. Now, if I'm not happy, we have a lot of secondary controls. You can see it under here. You can hit shift, you can hit clear steps. And use shift and tempo to turn the metronome on and off. It's actually quite handy. Now let's play the Eurorack. Now, if I'm not happy with the timing here, for example, of certain notes, or maybe I'm not happy with the amount of velocity on certain notes, because as you hear, the velocity controls the filter cutoff here. So if I'm not happy, I'll press Step Edit, and I can change the velocity here per note a bit. So the sequencers have 3 modes of recording. You saw me do live recording. You just hit record, hit play. And it should also be noted that the sequencers can either be poly or mono. So if I use the second way of recording into the sequencer, just holding down a step and making a chord. So you could have a chord progression going and switching it to mono while you're playing to get some kind of variation. And of course, the third way of recording into the sequencer is just hitting record and just playing whatever you want. Adding rests. Take a quick break from the overview. I thought you might want to see the back of it, what kind of connections we have. So first we have the 4 Eurorack voices. All of them have pitch and gate, as well as a mod output that you could use for example to control the filter of a URAC module or something else. This mod output can be assigned to respond to, for example, the velocity of the keyboard or say the aftertouch. We have 8 drum gates designed for triggering URAC drum modules. We have clock in and out as well as reset out. 1 MIDI input as well as 2 MIDI outputs. Metronome audio output as well as the level for the speaker. Input for a sustain pedal. We have the USB, the power and the on and off switch here. And yes, you can power it using USB only or the DC power if you don't want to use a computer. Now let's talk about secondary functions. There's plenty of shift commands. We have pattern control over here, and down here we have some stuff that is related to the arpeggiator, and we also have this one here. So you can have a pattern running forward, randomize it, or walking. Walking is especially interesting, so let me play here. So with walking, it goes a few steps, then I think there's a random chance that it goes back a few steps, giving it a sort of, interesting back and forth. Now we can clear pattern, we can clear steps, we can also nudge the entire pattern. Now we can use all of these functions while we're playing. So I've saved the pattern and I can use the shift and save function here to reload the pattern. So let me mess it up a bit, because we can change the order of notes here. We can do random octave. Let me show you. So you heard me reload there at the end. So we can do a bunch of things. And also if you have set it up to scale, when you do random notes, you actually get them in scale, which is really nice. You can randomize melodic content and stuff like that. So they randomized just a little pattern that you could use as a variation if you want to. Now drum tracks can also be poly or mono. It basically means that in mono, all of the 24 tracks on the one drum track, I hope it's not too confusing, one drum track, it actually has 24 tracks on it. Each of the 24 tracks can have different lengths. So for example, we have this sound here. Now if I select poly, so I can set the length of each drum track individually. Now some of the secondary functions are for the arpeggiator. So if you just play something here, we can change the pattern here, octave range, time division, changing the scale. And we can, of course, just like on the old keystep, press hold here. And we can use these controls here to make changes to the arpeggio while we're playing. Now let's talk about the keyboard. A lot of people are asking me, is it similar to the keystep? And the answer is yes. So if you enjoyed the keystep's keyboard, you'll enjoy this. If you thought that the keystep was way too small for you, this is probably still way too small for you. But it does feel good. It's a nice mini keyboard, just like on the original keystep. It's velocity sensitive. And it has aftertouch. On the side here, We have the touch strips, so one for pitch and one for mod, and we have the roller/looper. Which is actually a really good performance tool to be using. And the pitch strip has this center zone where nothing, like a dead zone where nothing happens. Now, earlier in the video, I did say that on individual steps, you can actually place down multiple notes, making a chord, and edit the individual notes in the chord. So to do this, you hit step edit, you hit overdub, and now you can select the individual note. You can change the gate of that note, the velocity of that note, and as you can see here, the values change. So it's not that difficult to create this movement within a chord. And I also want to mention that you can set up the 5 encoders to send CC messages using the control mode. These 5 controls can then also be recorded either live or via step recording into its own dedicated track. But it's important for me to note that this is not something that works per track. Instead, control mode is its own dedicated thing. Last in this video, let me mention a few pros and cons. Overall, very pleased with this MIDI keyboard. I think it's a good successor to the Keystep, but just like with the Keystep, it's not a one-size-fits-all. All MIDI sequencers have limitations, and I think that the primary one for the Keystep Pro is the amount of tracks. There's just the 4 tracks, or 24 on the drum track, if you will. But 4 tracks makes it less competitive compared to something like the SL Mark III, which has 8 tracks. And speaking of the SL Mark III, the SL Mark III actually can do step sequencing of all its controls. So you can set up each of the controls to different CC values and step sequence these changes, which is really cool. And that is something where the Keystep Pro really lacks. It doesn't really have that much hands-on control in terms of knobs and faders. But what it does have is a ton of interesting functions here for generating melodies and sequences and changing the sequences, which is a big plus. It's very hands-on. It's very much meant for performances, which I dig a lot. Another unique selling point is, of course, the metronome. It's a small thing. I joked about it earlier in the video, but for me personally, it can be a deal breaker because it's actually super useful with the count-in, having the metronome. So that's something you won't find on most MIDI sequencers, especially in this price category. I think that the form factor is actually a lot better than it might look on camera. It's actually small, it doesn't feel big at all. Feels like something you could actually throw in a bag, a slightly larger bag maybe, but still it's not super cumbersome. The SL Mark III, which is one of the main competitors to this MIDI keyboard, is much larger. So the size is both a pro and a con. If you want full-sized keys, this is not it, but if you want something more compact, this is it. Now, speaking of a positive, I love the I/O. And the I/O sets it apart from a lot of the competition because it's actually a really good MIDI sequencer and Eurorack sequencer, modular sequencer with the drum gates, with the possible four voices for Eurorack, but also you have the MIDI out. So this was my little review of the Keystep Pro. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, let me know in the comment section what other videos you want to see here on the channel. And as always, big thank you to today's sponsor, distrokid.com. If you want to upload your music to Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, and so on, go and check out DistroKid. I have a link in the description. You get a bit of a discount, and I'm using this service to publish my own music. Really like the service, so go and check it out if you want to. And I've also just released my song Frankly. It's available on all stores basically, linked in the description. So hope to see you in another video. Talk to you later.